I'm sitting here reflecting on my conversation with David, who is my guest this week on the podcast. And I can't stop thinking about a post that Brene Brown shared recently on Instagram, where she was celebrating her 30th sobriety birthday. And she pointed to a specific passage in the Big Book that describes a very particular state of being. And it says that once we reach a certain point, we aren't fighting our addiction anymore, but we aren't hiding from it either. Instead, we've been placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. It's this idea that we haven't even necessarily sworn off, but rather it's that the problem has been removed. It simply doesn't exist for us in the same way anymore. We aren't cocky about it, but we aren't afraid of it either. Brene noted that this experience remains true as long as we stay in fit spiritual condition. And hearing David, my guest today, talk about his recovery nuggets and the bright future of this work, I realized that what he's describing is exactly that, the work of maintaining our fit spiritual condition. And for me, that fit condition means staying really honest about that 13-year-old version of me who just wanted the noise to stop. The neutrality that Brene describes, that is the reclaiming work. That is the moment where you realize that you don't need the crutch because the wound has finally been addressed. So if you're listening today and you are still in the fighting phase where you feel like you're in a daily wrestling match with your habits or your trauma, I want you to know that neutrality is possible. The dialogue that David and I had today is about how we get there. It's about moving from the exhaustion of the fight into the safety of being protected. I'll see you back in a few days for the midweek reframe, where we'll talk more about what fit spiritual condition looks like for a brain in the middle of a major life move. But until then, take a deep breath. The problem can be removed, and you are doing the work. So I hope that you enjoyed this really honest, vulnerable conversation with my guest, David, from Recovery Nuggets podcast. Thanks. Welcome to Reclaiming Me, a trauma-informed podcast helping women with complex PTSD heal the lasting impact of childhood attachment wounds from parents and caregivers, so you can finally release people-pleasing and perfectionism and learn to trust in relationships, beginning with the one you have with yourself. I'm your host, Cindy Payne, therapist, trauma specialist, and a woman who has walked this path both personally and professionally. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Reclaiming Me. And today is a special full circle moment for me because a while back, I had the honor of being a guest on the Recovery Nuggets podcast with David Clemen to share my own journey, including my 4 years of sobriety from alcohol. So today I get the pleasure of turning the mic around, and joining me is the man who created that space to do this, David Clemen. And so David, you have already shared with me that the dialogue is wide open. So thank you for opening it up here with me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show. Grateful to be here. And, I look forward to this conversation.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, let's just jump right in for our listeners. You've shared so many recovery nuggets with your own audience, but for those that are not familiar with you and your story, I want to go back, if we could, to the beginning of your story. So you talk a lot about long-term recovery, and I'm wondering, what did the very start of that journey look like for you? So was there a moment where you realized maybe that your story wasn't just for you, but something that maybe needed to be shared through a podcast?
Oh, well, that's a good question. The the reason for the podcast was during COVID, I noticed that a lot of people were sharing alternative methods to their recovery, like different
Hmm.
modalities other than 12-step
Yeah.
groups. You know, my recovery started and it continues to be um, related to 12-step recovery.
Hmm.
But what I learned during that time was that it's not one size fits all.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more depth to the way people recover than just that.
Hmm.
And so when you start hearing different modalities in terms of like smart recovery, recovery dharma, 12 step, and then people getting into processing their trauma and using other modalities like somatic healing,
Hmm.
EMDR, talk therapy, going on retreats, meditation. There's lots of different ways that people can face this. And also that the other part is that you don't have to hit rock bottom to quit.
Yeah.
Like if it's not working well in your life, that's an option as well. And so and then also seeing people talking about trauma from sexual abuse or narcissistic
Hmm.
abuse, things like yourself, complex
Yeah.
PTSD. I think it just was an avenue for people to come on and share their experience and then also offer recovery insights,
Yeah.
things that have worked for them.
Hmm.
And that's really where it started. And then I used an AI generator for the the logo
Okay.
and then I played with a couple of names. One of the name was going to be like the Recovery Explorer, and it had a figure climbing a mountain, and then the Recovery Nuggets. I really liked, so it was between those two, but I really like the idea of that. You know, we're kind of mining for stuff as we go
Yeah.
along, and a Recovery Nugget is just an insight of actually. I have it on my card. It says, "What is a recovery nugget? An experience based insight or tip shared to help others in addiction or recovery."
Oh, okay. Okay. So that is the literal meaning of the Recovery Nuggets podcast then, am I
Right.
correct? That people are
Right. And
sharing.
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And I really like to focus on recovery more than addiction because most of the people that listen already know how to use or
Mhm.
how they got there. So I really try to stay focused on recovery and the things that, and have guests on that refer to recovery insights and techniques.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's amazing. And I really like the angle that you use because I would agree with that. There's so much literature and support, it seems like, for people in the early stages when they decide to stop using whatever substance that they were using. But
Uh-huh.
once we put the substance down, we have a lot of work to do ahead of us, right? And you and I were talking about that
Yeah.
actually before we got on this
Mhm.
recording, that the recovery is just this ongoing journey, for lack of a better word, right? That we're doing daily, and it involves so much of the emotional work. Would you agree?
Mm. Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And but you have to put the thing down
Mhm.
long enough to start feeling. So
Yes.
one thing that happened when I got clean was that I felt
Mhm.
better, but then I feel better. And so you feel the good, bad, ugly, and different
Yes.
better. And so you're just sitting with it. And so the tool that I used to use to numb out is not there. So then you can pick up retail therapy. We were talking about too much
Yeah.
coffee. Um, some people pick up exercise or
Mhm.
whatever, but it's all about looking outward to feel
Mhm.
better when the more we recover, we can start to feel better on the inside.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I know, like, a lot of our listeners, again, this might be the first time that they've heard your story. And so I'm wondering if you
Uh-huh.
wouldn't mind, just spending some brief time talking about, what led you to recovery in general. Because
Sure.
you've been sober for 20 plus years, did you say?
Almost
Ah, it's
20
amazing.
in July.
Wow.
July 8th, I'll be 20 years
Oh,
clean.
huge
Yep.
milestone. Congratulations. Yeah. What would you
Sure.
like
Thank you.
listeners to
And I'll
share?
give I'll give the kind of the Cliff Notes version. And but I had a pretty good childhood and my parents are, still alive, they're hardworking, but I always, as an only child, I was kind of wired to be by myself
Mhm.
anyway, because when you're an only child, so I always drew and painted and spent a lot of time in my room. And that served me well for a while, but then when you flip it on its head and you're in addiction, being okay by yourself really could lead to isolation.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the end of it. But uh the first time that I got clean wasn't because I wanted to. It was because everyone found out that I had a
Mhm.
problem. And I was living in New York City. I went to school in VCU and studied fashion design. So in my mind, I was always gonna move to New
Yeah.
York and work in fashion design and make it or fill some void that I just didn't feel good enough about myself. Like in my mind, I had to be rich and famous or something to fill that void. That's how big of a hole it
Yeah.
was that I wasn't okay with me. So, and that there's ego wrapped up in
Sure.
that as well, like proving something to your parents or to friends or the small town that you came
Mhm.
from. Look at me, I'm going to do this and it's going to fill a void.
Yeah.
So, and I was doing well up there. Um, I was doing fashion shows and like being a part of production and learning this industry. And then I got introduced to the drug that really, it was a party drug, and it didn't take over immediately, but it was fairly quick. High school and college, it was the usual, like, drinking and, weed and stuff like
Sure.
that. But eventually, once I found I got involved with cocaine, it just be kind of, it was like, oh, this is what I've been missing. So now I can have a lot of fun and stay up longer.
Yeah.
So I wasn't a hardcore like opiate user where I just stayed in a room by
Mhm.
myself in the beginning. I like to be out and have fun and do stuff. And I never wanted I got addicted to fun as much as I did the drugs and the parties.
Yeah. Okay.
So it all was going hand in hand, that and then my ego and then being in New York and thinking like I was going to be something or whatever, which without the drugs might have been a good path, but when you mix that in, it got out of
Yeah.
hand. So I left New York. It was getting too much. Went home, lived with my parents, and I mean, I was depressed. I'd failed. And now I was addicted, and they didn't even know I was
Mhm.
addicted. So towards the end, it became pretty clear that I had a problem, and I was stealing money out of my dad's safe, and like he figured it out,
Yeah.
and then so I was forced to live with him
Mhm.
under his own house
Mm.
arrest. Okay, and I'm like 27 and under my dad's house arrest because he wanted to help
Yeah.
me trying to get jobs and things like that and go into outpatient program. And I did some 12 step, but I wasn't ready for the party to be
Yeah.
over. I really was doing it for my mom, my dad, my friends, because at that point, everyone knew I had a problem except
Mhm.
me. I just hadn't found the right
Yeah.
combination. So then eventually I moved back to New York, about a year later, year and a half, something like
Mhm.
that. But I wasn't going to use this time. It was just going to be focused on what I want. It took like less than 2 years.
Okay.
And then I was headed down the same path.
Mhm.
And so I had found where I live now in North Carolina on the internet. And it was a college town, a beach town. They had a movie studio here, which they still do. So I'm like, that looks pretty
Yeah.
cool. Maybe I'll move down there and they won't have drugs there,
Right.
right?
Right. It'll be the one town.
Right. They won't have any bars or drugs. But anyway, so I moved down here and then within a year and a half, 2 years, I was headed down the same path. And then here's the moment of clarity. I was my girlfriend was living with me at the
Mhm.
time. I was pretty much out of money. I had scraped up like $10 to get a pint of the cheapest vodka I could get.
Yeah.
And then she came home and I was passed out. She thought I had overdosed or
Mhm.
something. And I remember waking up. She was on the phone with her brother. She was screaming, I can't live like this
Mm.
anymore. I can't live like this anymore. And her screaming that was what I had been feeling for years.
Yes.
And then And then the next day I went to a meeting, and that was July 2006. And then that started a whole different journey in my life
Yeah.
because I was sick of it.
Mm.
And so I knew that there was a better way to live. Like, I remember, like, kind of living at an animalistic level of existence where, like, there were dishes
Mhm.
everywhere and there was, just clothes everywhere. It was just filthy, it just was not, it wasn't living. I was just existing.
Yes.
And I remember I had these wooden shelves and I wrote, like, is this how your parents raised you to live? Like, I kept seeing that every day. And it was kind of a motivational thing that I knew I was ready to quit, but it's such a daunting, I guess, like, thought to walk away from this life that you thought you loved for so
Mhm.
long.
Mhm.
And then here you are, like, going to a meeting
Yeah.
and asking for help.
Yes.
And then that started the journey.
Oh, wow. That gives me chills just listening to all of that. And I just really appreciate your transparency to talk about something that's so
Mhm.
tender and so can be so painful. And I know
Yeah.
you and I have talked a lot about shame, specifically when I was a guest on your
Uh-huh.
podcast. And, for me,
Right.
when I hear this, I can't help but look at it through my lens as a counselor. And in my practice, I often see substance use as more of a survival mechanism, right? It's a way to manage
Right.
complex trauma when the world around us feels
Right.
unsafe. And in your own journey or in the stories that you hear from your guests, how much of recovery is actually the process of finally addressing that underlying trauma? And did you feel like you were running away from a substance or running towards a sense of safety?
Well, I would say that it's a huge part of people's story and why they pick up in the first
Hmm.
place. Some people, they just picked it up for fun and it got out of
Yeah.
hand. Some people get injured, they pick up
Hmm.
opioids, and then they get hooked and they can't get them anymore, so they have to go to the street.
Yeah.
Um, I know someone that is actually trying to get off of kratom right now
Mm.
because of
Yeah.
they sell it in gas
Yep.
stations and it's no joke.
Yeah.
But what I would say for my story, I can say that when I was 5, I was, molested by a
Hmm.
babysitter. And, that took my innocence in terms of what is a normal boundary for sexuality
Yes.
early on. And she was probably 16, I was 5 or
Hmm.
6. So in the recovery process, what I've learned is that, like, why would she do that to a 5-year-old? Well, something happened to her too.
Yes.
So in going forward, I was able to apply some compassion and forgiveness to
Yeah.
her and then see where and it didn't happen for a long time, but I do remember it was a few times.
Hmm.
Okay. And I don't mind sharing about any of this stuff because that was one of the things that led me to be
Hmm.
promiscuous, especially when I was using. And it just got worse as I went on because there was no value held in regard to intimacy. It was already taken away. It's like, oh, this is just something you
Yeah.
do with another person if you have the opportunity, like, oh, well, it's free love and whatever. But I was 5.
Yes.
So
Yes.
that's kind of an early door to a Pandora's box of sexuality, right?
Sure.
So there was that. And then, during the worst of my addiction, lots of failed relationships, in and out of jobs because my guilt and shame over the years was building on top of, what do we do when we feel that way? We use over it to mask it,
Yes.
right? So it numbs it all
Hmm.
out. And all of these things I've been able to deal with and make peace with because I stayed clean, worked in 12 steps, wrote about it, shared it with someone, applied different techniques not to be that person anymore because I'm not that person anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, dealing with those traumas like mine, and it's not about, your trauma is big to you and whatever trauma was big to
Hmm.
me. Some people's are, it's not about like tit for tat. Yours is worse
Mm-mm.
than mine. So we should get medals. It's not about that. It's about like what caused you to shut down.
Yeah.
And that's what I've learned is like, whatever the thing is, I've got to deal with it,
Sure.
you know?
Sure. Yeah.
But I will say this caveat though,
Yeah.
if you're just starting to get clean and you're trying to walk away with, I don't it's not necessarily a great idea to just jump into the trauma either.
No, no,
Like we have to build up
we do.
and yeah, get a foundation of not using first,
Mhm,
get some tools, get with
mhm,
someone that, a community of some sort. It doesn't have to, whatever works for you,
mhm.
maybe some therapy or whatever, and then get to that point where you feel like you're ready to, you know, broach that subject or
Sure.
those subjects.
I really appreciate you saying that it's not something that we just jump right into, right? Because when you first put the substance or the whatever the addiction is, when you first put it
Uh-huh.
down, you are like a raw exposed nerve still, right? Like you're walking around trying to figure out how to live a life without something to take the edge off. And that can feel very overwhelming and scary, even if you're in support groups. But at the end of the day, disease or addiction is a disease of isolation, right? And
Right.
so we need the community, we need the safety and support, but we're not probably going to trust it in the beginning, would you say? Like we've got to kind of build that level of trust. And especially if there's been a violation, such as sexual abuse. And
Definitely.
yeah, and I hear that often that, when there's grooming involved and when you are a child and you don't know really, I mean, you have a sense that something maybe is a little off, but there can be a lot of
Uh-huh.
guilt and shame because it's a power dynamic, right? And you're just
Yeah.
following the adult's lead in the room, but it leads to so many confusing feelings and hypersexuality and all of those things that were essentially stolen from you, right? As a
Uh-huh.
child. And so doing the work of amends and forgiveness, and that is heavy duty emotional sobriety
Uh-huh.
lifting. And I would not recommend that
Yeah.
anyone start out with the expectation that they're going to just, do this work in a matter of 30 days and be good. Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's like one of my favorite movies is What About Bob? And,
Oh,
like
yeah.
he
Yes.
talks about baby steps in there, like
Yeah.
let's first like figure out how to stop destroying ourselves one drink or bag or whatever at a time.
Yes.
And then, I you're probably into this too, but emotional like regulating your nervous
Mhm.
system is huge.
Yes. It's everything.
But if it's everything, but if you have lived on the edge of anxiety and fear
Mhm.
for many, many
Mhm.
years, I mean, there has to be some evidence that it's getting better a little bit.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I'm safe in this room. Like I can't have someone just say, "You're safe now. You quit doing this thing,"
Right.
or that the person that accosted you or
Mhm.
whatever is gone. Okay, but I've got to have some evidence that things are getting calmer and a better atmosphere of recovery and safety in my life to start believing it. It's almost like an evidence based regulation.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It
Yeah,
is.
because I'll say a lot of people, in recovery, they're kind of out on the higher power thing in the beginning
Mhm.
or God or whatever because of the things that have happened, which is totally understandable. It's like, well, I wasn't protected there, so why
Mm.
would I believe it now?
Yeah.
So then it kind of the recovery comes back to me, and my recovery is actually my responsibility.
Yes.
Like the things that happened, totally not my fault.
Yes.
Some of them were my fault when I was using, but I'm saying early on.
Right.
But once I admit that the thing is not working, then it's my responsibility.
Yeah.
My recovery is now my responsibility.
Oh, you know what that brought up for me? I don't know if you've read Laura McCowan's book "Push Off From Here," but she's a
Mm-mm,
quit lit author, and she wrote a book called "Push Off From Here," and it's these 9 truths that she basically came up with, and two of
mhm,
those are: it's not your fault, but it is your
mhm.
responsibility. And,
Yeah.
I just think that speaks so much to the pain. And when we get sick and tired of being sick and tired, like we have to be tired of
Mhm,
our own stuff to go, okay,
mhm,
like I can blame everybody around me. And I hate that these things happen
mhm,
to us. I hate that we fall
mhm.
victim to people who are in positions of power that
Right.
abuse that, whether that be friends or family members or just acquaintances. But now I have to
Mhm.
take responsibility for the thing that happened, and only I can do it.
Right.
I can't do it for my mom. I can't do it for my kids. I have to do it for
Mhm.
myself. That's my takeaway from
Right.
that.
Yeah. One of my favorite lines in the literature that I use, it says, through our inability to accept personal responsibility,
Mm.
we were actually creating our own problems.
Ooh, can you say that one more time?
Through our inability to accept personal
Mhm.
responsibility, we were actually creating our own problems. And so
Good.
what that means to me is that when I was using, I had addict financing. Okay.
Yeah.
So, so because I spent 180 on drugs and then went to the bar and spent another
Mhm.
100, and then the power bill was due Monday and then they didn't get paid. And so the power bill was off. The person that is playing the victim role is that, man, power bill's too much. It shouldn't be that much. Da 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 da. Da.
Mhm. Yeah.
Actually, if you weren't doing that and you were just being personally responsible and put that money first,
Yeah.
things would look a lot different, and you could apply that to a lot of different things.
Sure.
And, and I heard this guy on the radio, it was like NPR or something. The first month I got clean, I was up at a cabin and my mom had, and he said, the reason addiction's so baffling is because the family members don't realize that the addict's definition of normal changes as they go along.
Mm.
So, like in the beginning, everything, food in the fridge, lights are on, maybe a
Mhm.
job, connected with family, that's normal. But as the addiction gets worse, hey, I might not shower. I might not have any personal hygiene. There may be food in the house. Maybe the water's not
Mhm.
on. And so it just gets worse to that degradation. I didn't necessarily go that far, but I've seen it. And
Yeah.
we all know stories of that and the definition of normal change through addiction.
Ooh, yeah. That's really good perspective, though, right? Because I think that touches on just the spectrum, the wide spectrum of addiction, right? And,
Mhm.
you know, I'm going to kind of shift it a little bit because I've been talking a lot on
Mhm.
my podcast about, I don't know if you're familiar with the Enneagram. It's like a type system to understand yourself a
Mhm.
little bit deeper.
Yeah.
And I personally, I'm an
Yeah.
Enneagram type 1. So for me, I'm very big on like rules and structure and reforming
Right.
and right versus wrong and all of that. And so for me, recovery involves a lot of structure and doing the work.
Mhm.
I'm doing air quotes
Yeah.
here, but as you know,
Yeah.
life is not always that tidy. And I'm curious because I know you're an
No.
artist and you're a creative type. And how does how do you think your personality influences how you handle what I call the messy parts of a long-term recovery? So when things aren't going perfectly, maybe you have a setback or you have an interaction with a family
Mhm.
member that you thought was healed and it like is stirring up a lot of turmoil inside of you. How do you keep that wide open dialogue going with yourself?
Well, that's a good one. There's a lot of different. It's funny because you were saying there's rules and structure,
Yeah.
and like I have to be careful of wanting to fix, manage, and control
Oh,
things.
yeah. Don't we all?
And the fix, manage, and control really gets us into a trouble
Yeah.
because we are paralyzed with overthinking, trying to figure out who's doing what. Do I need to talk to that person and tell them not to say this to that person or that person and vice versa? And then there I am paralyzed, fix, managing, control something that I'm powerless over.
Yeah.
Right. And so like I think, let's see, 2012. So I was about 6 or 7 years clean. I got married and then in 2014, my wife came home and said that she came out
Mhm.
and that she had been having an
Mm.
affair. Okay. That was very, very
Yeah.
difficult.
Yeah.
In the moment, I I didn't really know what to say. I said, but it takes a lot of compassion for you or courage for you to come out.
Mhm.
I said it's very upsetting to me, but because we're married.
Yeah.
So in the moment, there was no handbook for how I was going to react. So we separated, and when that was going on, I basically made a commitment to myself. I said, I'm going to go to work and I'm coming home
Mhm.
and I'm not going to use.
Mhm.
Like, I just had to keep it real basic. Like, there was
Mm.
no going out. I didn't go to a ton of meetings. I just had to come back in and kind of get in my own cocoon for a while.
Mhm.
And I made that commitment to myself that I wasn't going to use. And I remember losing like a month of time,
Yeah.
like looking back at the calendar, like my body went to work and
Mhm.
you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Um, and so that was probably the most painful thing that has happened. That's one of them.
Yeah.
But what I realized is like we get attached to the story as well.
Mhm.
Okay. So, like in the beginning, if you ask me, man, I'm so sorry that happened to you. What happened? Well, I had that story. I was ready. I was ready to tell you the story
Mhm.
of how she was in recovery. She had an affair with her
Mhm.
sponsee. And can you believe that? It's so trifling and all this stuff. In the end, really what happened was two people were in a
Mhm.
relationship. It fell
Mhm.
apart and then went their separate ways. Like there's a lot less charge on that.
Yeah.
And there's no right or wrong, right? But we get so attached to the story because we want to like be seen of how painful it is. But eventually I just got tired of talking about
Mhm.
it. And then I was so stuck by talking about it that it took me to a new level of recovery because it forced me to get unstuck and go get some help. And that's when I found out about EMDR.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So then that shifted me into a different way to process trauma. And so it was about 6 or 7 sessions, and I went, and it doesn't hold a charge
Yeah.
anymore. And I'm not sharing that story to put her on blast at all. Like she's doing well, and like my stepdaughter just graduated from college
Yeah.
and all that stuff. So, like, I'm just sharing about difficult times when you are in the process of
Mhm.
recovery are actually doable. It's just really, it becomes a new level of like, I'm not going to use, I'm making a commitment to
Mhm.
myself. It's going to suck. And like, I stayed up all night at that time. I went into my studio and I just painted all night and I was like talking to, I was praying and I'm like, I know this is going to suck.
Yeah.
But I also had some inklings that it wasn't
Mhm.
working. And so when I really get honest about it, like I had started to look about, for divorce information
Yeah.
anyway before
Mhm.
that. So, like, the reality is like, just because I wasn't the one to make the decision, the reality is it was coming to an end.
Yeah.
We can all get into the salacious nature of whatever happened,
Mhm.
but it just fell apart,
Mhm.
and I learned a lot in that
Mhm.
relationship. I learned I could be a stepdad. I learned better financial responsibility within a household and things like that. So, time can heal some things
Yes.
too, but when you're fresh in that shit, excuse me,
No, we
but
cuss on this podcast.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like right in the beginning, it's just like, oh, that's a gut
Oh
punch.
gosh,
And
yeah.
so what happened was I started to look at my life totally different.
Mhm.
Certain things, they were done. That was done,
Yeah.
and I'm not talking about just the relationship. It was just, okay, what do I want to do now? So what I did was I went
Mhm.
traveling and I went to meditation retreats.
Mm,
There were these meditation retreats through Shambhala that I wanted to do.
yes.
And so I signed up for them. I went to meditation retreats. I went to Miami for Art Basel. I went to Colorado to see some friends. I went to
Mhm.
California. You know what I mean? I just was like, all right, that's it. This is like a brand new clean slate. And so,
Wow. Thank you for
you know,
sharing that. There's so
oh,
many
yeah, you're welcome.
beautiful parts to that story that stick out to me. And I guess at the top of my mind, what comes up is this like radical acceptance at some point, right?
Uh-huh,
Like when we
uh-huh,
when we look at the story and how charged, as you say, the story becomes, we have to go, okay, hold on. How wrapped up am I? How identified am I with this story? Yes, this happened,
uh-huh,
but what power
uh-huh.
does it still have in my life now? And if I can't get out from
Right.
underneath that, and another thing you said that I want to point out is I had to simplify. Like I had to cut it down to the bare basics. And I think that's good
Uh-huh,
advice for anybody who's working on a path of healing, whether it be from alcohol and drugs or whatever they're using to kind of numb whatever
uh-huh,
pain they have from relational trauma. It's this
uh-huh,
idea of I can't continue to try to fight through this at the same level as I was when I was,
uh-huh.
using the substance or doing the thing. I have to strip it down to the bare bones. And if it's coming to work and going to work and like if that's all I do, great.
Yeah.
like, can
Yeah. It was
that
enough.
was
Yeah.
enough. And then after a while, when you kind of got your footing, what I'm understanding at least is it really opened up some space for you to be able to widen your perspective and then seek other modalities like meditation and just getting to know different types of communities with healing that's there and available.
Mhm.
Yeah.
100%. And during that time, actually, I was reading The Art of Forgiveness by the Dalai Lama,
Yeah.
and there's a beautiful story in there where the Chinese invaded Tibet,
Hmm.
took over the country, and kicked out all the monks and captured some of the monks, and some of the monks were in prison and tortured for 20
Mm.
years, and they were eventually freed, and then they were reunited with the Dalai Lama. And the Dalai Lama asked one of the monks, he said, "Were you scared when you were being, held prisoner and tortured and captive in captivity?" And the monk said, "Yes, I was very scared." And he said, "Well, what were you afraid of?" And he goes, "I was afraid I would lose compassion for my captors."
Mm. That's big.
And so I thought, and I started crying when I read
Yeah.
that because I'm like, damn, maybe I can apply a little bit of that to my
Yeah.
story and what I'm dealing with and say, well, all right, this is good practice
Yeah. Right. I'm getting a lot of
because I wasn't.
opportunities.
Yeah, well, that's the whole thing too. Is like a lot of this stuff is practice, man.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, and
You know.
here's how I kind of tend to frame it, and I don't know if this is 100% accurate, but there's a lot of literature that suggests that, we kind of stop maturing developmentally when the trauma
Mhm.
occurs, right? Like it kind of stunts our emotional
Yes.
growth and we're not able to kind of get past that. And so with recovery, we're learning how to be those younger versions of ourselves throughout life that maybe we didn't get to fully embrace at the time because we were so protective over. I mean, we were just
Yep.
trying to adapt and survive, right? So you're kind of
Uh-huh.
getting reacquainted with yourself at all of these different stages, and you can feel very young developmentally
Yeah.
when you are first in
Yeah.
recovery, right? And
Yeah. Oh, 100%.
yeah, and
Yeah. The nerves are on the outside.
it
Yeah.
totally. The nerves are on the outside. Yeah. And, before we started recording, we were talking about like the freedom and like, gosh, isn't it better over here on the other side? Like that
Mhm.
you can wake up and know that you can own the truth of your life, right? Like you're not having to hide or evade or
Yeah.
cover anything up. And, you were talking about just the recovery future it's a bright one, and but
It
with
is.
all the techniques and the ways to recover that are emerging now that you've spoken about today, do you have like one thing that gives you the most hope for this next generation, of people seeking sobriety or people coming in and, saying, hey, like the jig is up, like this doesn't
Yeah.
work for me anymore? Is there one thing that gives you hope, or maybe more than one?
Um, yeah, there's probably more than one
Yeah.
because I mean, there's a lot of stats that alcohol sales are down.
Hmm.
Um, you know, a lot of information is out
Yeah.
there about the really how not good these things are for
Hmm.
you. I mean, and there's also a lot more people talking about recovery and addiction just in general, and there's not as big of a stigma because every person that I know that has known someone
Hmm.
that has been affected by it has been maybe passed away from it. So it's not like the big secret, like back in the day, people, if like a young girl got pregnant, there were stories she had to go to Florida for 9 months
Yeah.
because it was a big shame. You know what I mean? Oh, she went to grandma's house for 9 months, or, Uncle Larry had to go away to the hospital for a little while and that kind of stuff. Like nobody talked about it.
Hmm.
And a lot of these stigmas came from people not learning to be able to communicate about it.
Yeah.
Like, especially men, we're taught, don't talk about it, stuff it
Mhm.
down. And then if you feel like talking about it, just stuff it down just a little bit more.
Yes. Yes.
Just down, down, down.
That's right.
But yeah, but recovery. So I think the reason recovery is such a good antidote to the isolation of addiction for me has been one, they say, get out of your house and come to a
Mhm.
meeting. Okay.
Mhm.
So now it's me coming out of that dark room and being around people.
Yeah.
And then the other part of recovery is like, Okay, how do you feel?
Yeah.
Talk about it.
Oh,
Talk about it.
yes.
What? Okay, so I'm going to share about it. And then another part of it is like learning to write and journal
Mhm.
and get with another person that I trust and respect and share what I've written down, and then they give me feedback on it in a non-judgmental and compassionate way and share their experience.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I've got all these things though. The polar opposite of addiction, which addiction is like
Mhm.
non-communication, isolation, and
Yeah.
degradation, essentially.
Yeah.
And recovery is like, come on out of there.
Mhm.
It's not as bad as you think out
Yeah.
here. The monsters aren't necessarily going to get
Mhm.
you, but you got to put the stuff down and come on out here for a little bit,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And so that gives me a lot of hope. And so, um, it's just, you're seeing more people talk about it. It's more
Mhm.
open. Um, you're seeing like things like alcohol sales going down and like, even though fentanyl has been really bad, um, it's still being talked
Mhm.
about. It's not like the big quiet
Mhm.
secret, so it is, people are aware of it.
Yes.
Um, and not only that, but EMDR is helps soldiers with PTSD from trauma from that, but it also helps people with just like you were talking about relational
Mhm.
trauma or just simple traumas that you can go process the trauma so it doesn't have the charge like it used to, and then also reprogram some positive things in your life when you're doing a session.
Yeah.
So there's it's pretty
Yeah,
cool.
it's pretty cool stuff, and it takes a ton of courage. And I one other thing that came up just as you were talking about like the relational piece
Uh-huh.
of it. Again, a lot of my work is working on the relational trauma piece, and so when people decide to start telling the truth, and essentially that's what this is,
Uh,
right? Recovery is
yeah.
about emotional sobriety. It's about starting to name the patterns, have the courage to spot the patterns, talk about the patterns. And a lot of times in family systems, especially where there's complex trauma, when this happens, we will sometimes see a big pushback or it kind of complicates things,
Uh-huh.
right? Because it's
Uh-huh.
easier not to talk about it and just kind of like have a few and take the edge off and do what we normally do in family gatherings where we're all sitting
Yeah.
around and just kind of tolerating, but we're not really being truthful.
Hmm.
And we
Yeah.
touched on boundaries, I think, really briefly when I was on your show.
Uh-huh.
And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that, maybe perhaps from your own experience, like if you're still in this family system and you're still in
Uh-huh.
connection with these people, is there something that helped you or that you would share with the audience about, maybe something to look out for when you're starting to tell the truth?
Well, as far in terms of your me being around the environment that you grew
Uh-huh.
up in,
Yeah.
yeah, because there's the old homeostasis where everyone kind of comes back and gets back in that
Oh, yeah.
role of how we grew up,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Well, there's a couple things that I've figured out is that it's not going to be that long that you're going to be there if you
Yeah.
don't live with them.
Yeah.
Like say, and a lot of times, like if I have a lot of people that are in my family, maybe that, maybe I don't agree with them politically, let's
Yeah.
say, but I'm not going to be there for very
Mhm.
long. And if it comes up, I go, oh, fair enough, fair enough.
Yeah.
Like I don't have to engage past, niceties really.
Sure. Yeah.
And, I can love you because we're family and this, that, and the other, have a meal together, do fun things. And then, and this isn't really an avoidance thing. It's just like, I'm not here to change everybody anymore. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not.
Yeah.
Like, I know what works for me and my wife and my friends
Mhm.
and I, a lot of my family, I don't, it's not an issue anymore. But now here's what I would say. If it's going to be a drink fest and you're trying to quit
Mhm.
drinking, there's a couple of ways you can do it, but if you can take someone with
Mhm.
you and, uh, set a heart, like, mm, I've told people that I sponsor, stuff like that, like, you need to get a hand signal.
Yes.
And what I mean, like, is if you and I go to a party and I say, "Look, if I get uncomfortable, I'm just gonna, like, I'm gonna grab my ear or something or touch my watch,"
Mhm.
I'm not going to tell everybody at the party that I'm comfortable, but
Right.
the safe person that's with me, we're going to do it real subtle and we're going to get out of there or go catch five outside and catch some air
Yes.
and say, are you feeling okay? Because there's nothing worse trying to tell a drunk person that you're leaving a party.
Right.
Whoa. You know what I
You
mean?
can't leave.
Like, no, you can't leave. We're just getting started. It's like, you know what though?
Yeah.
And that goes back to my responsibility.
Yes.
Just because I go on vacation doesn't mean my addiction goes on vacation,
That's right.
like, or takes a break. I've got to, if I need a meeting on
Mhm.
vacation, I need to get the list before I go, not when I'm in trouble.
Yeah. Requires some
You
foresight
know,
on your part, right?
yeah, you got to have some foresight. And there's apps out there, there's
Mhm.
websites, there's online meetings around the world 24/7
Mhm.
now.
Mhm.
If what works for you. But, yeah, family dynamics are probably a big part of the reason why we're here in the first
Yes.
place.
I can answer
And
that.
that's not anybody's fault.
No.
That's not anybody's
No.
fault, It's just, like, I know that, uh, some of my issues have come from they were passed down to
Mhm.
people, and then I was conditioned with the same thing, and so breaking the cycle
Yes.
is a big part of recovery.
Mhm.
That's part of the freedom too, because we all get triggered,
Mhm.
but how can I deal with the trigger?
Yeah.
Because if I'm trying to go back for 30 years and pull up all of my resentments and say, well, you did this, that's not helping me at
No.
all. It's like, okay, that stuff happened. What can I do going forward? How can I be a little more safe in my life and,
Mhm.
and and what works for
Mhm.
me? And that's how I can keep it moving.
Beautiful.
This comedian, he said, "Don't get fired up at Thanksgiving if the crazy uncle starts spouting off some stuff that you don't." He's like, "Fair enough, buddy. Fair enough." And then you're going to be gone in an hour anyway.
That's
So
right. That's right.
you
Yeah.
know, um, but it is a practice because sometimes things catch us off
Yes.
guard, and
Yeah.
we lose it. We just lose it, and that's fine too.
Yeah, well, and that's what all this work is about, right? Is being able to start recognizing the patterns and the role that you
Uh-huh.
played and then redefining that role for yourself and reclaiming it essentially, right? That's
Yeah,
that's where the
yeah,
work is. That's where the freedom and the healing
yeah.
is. And I never want to tie this up in a bow and make this look like it's just such a beautiful outcome. I mean, it can be for sure, but there's a
Yeah.
lot of emotional work. And I know on your podcast, you ask
Mhm.
your guests to share a recovery nugget, to leave with your audience. And I thought it would be fitting to do the same with you today and kind of turn the tables. And I know we've talked about a lot of parts of recovery, but before I let
Yeah.
you go, what is
Mhm.
one recovery nugget that you want to leave with my listeners today, especially those that might be struggling to see this freedom, this bright future they have ahead of them, a way to break their generational trauma and start living their life on their terms.
Mhm. Well, I think it goes to the admission of truth to yourself
Yeah.
that it's a problem
Hmm.
now. And I remember looking at other people in bars and being like, why do we keep doing this shit?
Yeah.
You know,
What's the purpose?
and like, why I'm so sad
Mm,
and I keep doing this. And the admission leads to the willingness to ask for help.
yeah.
And then I can't tell help how to help me
Oh,
because I, cl-
that's good. I can't tell help how to help me. Dang.
so it's tough, man. It's tough, but the when I got honest with myself, and you mentioned it earlier, it's like once I admitted to myself that it's a problem,
Yeah.
it was like a big, it's the ultimate form of surrender. It's like I give up.
Yeah.
I can't do this
Yeah.
anymore, and that's really where this journey started.
Hmm.
And ask for help. I have found that when I ask for help, help shows up.
Yeah.
But if I don't ask for it, are perfectly fine leaving me alone because I'm saying I don't want your help.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's such an important, powerful message, whether again, it be healing from substances or healing from familial, patterns of abuse, right? Like
Yeah.
we have to be able to be vulnerable enough to take the risk to ask for help.
Yeah.
And for those that have been hurt through relationships, to learn to heal through relationships is
Mhm.
daunting at first, but it is ultimately how we
Mhm.
heal. We cannot heal in isolation, I don't think. So,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. And one of my favorite Zen proverbs is let go or be
Oh,
dragged.
yeah. Yep. 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 I just had this image of like me holding on and like being dragged down the street, right? How many of us have felt like that, right? Like, so there's
Yeah.
this surrender, there's
Yeah.
this leap, and we don't always
Yeah.
know if where we're leaping into. But if you can, like you said, stay with it
Yeah.
long enough and you keep getting up and you keep asking for support, it will appear. It will appear.
Yeah, and I had to get really curious about it, and then I had to make it, once I was able to get a little bit of time under my belt, I started to make it a game, like, okay, how many meetings can I make in a
Yeah.
week? How many, pages can I write? And then, get up with my therapist or whatever and share, and, like, it was very freeing, and
Hmm.
I still journal today.
Yeah. Same. Yeah, it's like
Still journal,
yeah,
still
one of my regular practices, right? It's an anchoring for me. So,
Yeah, and sometimes it's not gonna look like what I thought,
yeah.
like, the first job I got was, $10 an
Mhm.
hour, and my bank account was in the red, so they wouldn't even let me put the checks in until it got so I had
Wow.
to, like, cash it at this fruit stand because they knew
Yeah.
yeah, they knew the owners where I worked. $10 an hour, but amazingly, it's still what I do today, and my mom had sent me an email and said, maybe you should mom's like, maybe you should go check this job out. You might be able to
Yeah.
do it. And I was sewing canvas on boats, and I've had just enough. And like when I quit smoking
Uh-huh.
cigarettes, I had a little bit more because I wasn't using something like negative in my life. And then there was like a little bit more, but it was like a slow
Mm.
process. And then if you can get into the actual process of it,
Mhm.
it makes it a lot easier with that surrender and asking for help.
Yes. Oh gosh, so many little nuggets of wisdom, words of wisdom,
Nuggets.
nuggets. You see what I did there?
Right. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I know
Yeah.
that our listeners or my listeners today are going to find pieces from this conversation that feel
Yeah.
relatable, that make them feel seen, that feel helpful. And if they want to find out more about you and consume more of your content, can you
Yeah.
point them in the direction? And I will, of course, list it in my show notes as well.
Sure. Yeah, the website's recoverynuggetspodcast.com, and then I have an Instagram with the same
Yeah.
handle.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
Fantastic. Well,
and the, podcast is on Apple, Spotify, Amazon
yeah.
Music, and a couple
Anywhere you
others.
can get your podcast mainly.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, if they have a question, they can, email me at recoverynuggetspodcast@gmail.
beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. I
Yeah,
so value this conversation and just getting
yeah,
to meet
yeah,
you and
happy to do it.
form this connection with you. It's been just invaluable to me. And I just really appreciate your honesty and your courage. And thank you for touching so many people's lives. And thank you for being here today.
Oh, thank you, yeah, and I appreciate your work too. It's, like I said, I shared it with my wife and 3 daughters,
Yeah.
and it's great stuff,
Oh.
it's, like, important work,
Well,
so,
thank you.
yeah.
And
It's a labor of
it's the
love.
labor of love. Everybody, please go
Yeah,
check
good luck with
out.
the house and all
Oh,
that
yeah,
stuff, yeah.
thanks. We're in this transition move, right? And so anytime
Yeah,
we're in the transition, we've got to hold on just a little bit tighter to
yeah,
our anchors and one day at a time. So I just really
that's right.
appreciate you, David, so much. And
Oh, definitely.
everybody go check out Recovery Nuggets podcast. It is a great one. And be
Cool,
well.
thank
Thanks,
you.
David.
All right, you too. Take care.
Thanks. Thank you for spending this time with me today. I hope you leave feeling a little lighter, a little more grounded, and a little closer to trusting yourself and your inner experience. If this episode resonated with you, please follow or subscribe so future conversations can meet you when they're needed. And if someone came to mind while you were listening, consider sharing this episode with them. That's one of the ways this work reaches the people who need it the most. You can find me on Instagram at Cindy Payne Rooted, and you can also visit me at cindypayne.com, where you'll find all episode links, blog posts, practice updates, and a free people-pleasing style quiz designed to help you notice your patterns with more compassion. And remember, every small step towards healing, self-trust, and presence matters. You are worthy of this journey. Thanks, everyone.